While today's video covers the topic of mental health, it does not qualify as professional mental health guidance. If you or someone you know is experiencing a mental health emergency, please contact your emergency service providers in your respective areas.
Hey everyone, it's Chris from the Gunpla Network, and welcome to the Gundamstorian podcast. This episode of the Gundamstorian podcast comes to you courtesy of Side 7 Exports. Side 7 Exports is your one-stop shop for all your P-Bandai and Gundam-based exclusive needs. After checking out their catalog, don't forget to use the promo code GUNPLANetwork10 for 10% off.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the Gunpla Network and episode 5 of the Gundamstorian Lore podcast. Today we have an extra special guest who will be helping us determine some of the more psychiatric side of Gundam characters. That didn't come out right, but that's fine. Allow me to introduce our judge this week, our super special guest, our Plamo Therapist, if you will, Taz.
Hey, thank you very much for having me here.
Oh, of course, anytime. Taz has his own channel on YouTube, which is conveniently named Plamo Therapist. Be sure to check him out. And just as a general little background, Taz, what do you do over there on your channel?
So basically I talk about a lot of the benefits of mental health that you can gain from building Gundam or any kind of plastic model kits really, and so I kind of talk a lot about that, but I do some other things such as some fun challenges and just some general builds just to show off some of the things that I'm doing. And so if you want to just check out and learn about more how you can use Gundam for mental health or talk about some mental health things relating to model kits and things like that, come over and check it out, have a good time, join the community. We're fun over here.
Thanks, Taz.
Appreciate it.
So, Taz has this very interesting little setup for us, which is a little bit more structured than our past debates, if you will. So Taz is going to be the director of the Tomino Institute for Mental Health, and he has one spot for a new intake or a new person to be adopted into the center for some mental health care. And each of us, Zappa, myself, Chris, and Pat, have a character we are advocating for. Now, Taz has a couple of criteria he's kind of basing things on. Taz, do you kind of want to run us through those so we have a little bit better understanding of what we're looking at?
Right, and so kind of when it comes to determining mental health sort of things and kind of, I guess for disclaimer starting off, in no way is this any sort of mental health guidance or any sort of promotion for seeking mental health for you guys. If you feel like you need some mental health help, go ahead and make sure you contact your mental health provider or even just your healthcare providers or the mental health hotline. And so this is more just a fun thing that we wanted to do. And so we want to look at some things that would make somebody a good candidate for seeking mental health help. And so one of the things we look at, especially when it comes to getting inpatient care, we look at, are they a threat to the people around them? Are they willing to hurt other people or use other people in certain ways and things like that. And so knowing that, in the Gundam universe, we obviously see a lot of people getting hurt in these series. And so we want to look at who has the potential to hurt the most people maybe, or maybe they have a potential to do more damage to somebody, not just physical damage, but maybe even psychological damage. So I left damage open up kind of broadly for them so that they can kind of figure out what they want to do for that. So very broad topic for them and kind of let them take it where they want to go. The other thing is who is most likely to refuse service. So if you know somebody who's having some trouble but they're refusing service and they feel like, nope, this isn't for me, it's a big sign for me, like, hey, if someone's refusing it, yeah, maybe they might not be ready, but that hardcore refusal might even deep down might just kind of indicate like, hey, maybe they really do know they need it, but they're just not ready yet. And so most likely to refuse service, maybe fight it, maybe willing to escape even. So I said refuse service and I let them kind of take it however they want. Another criteria we mentioned was an alternative manifestation of trauma. And it's just basically who's experienced trauma but is displaying it in a different way. And so if someone's having some issues, they might not be the one like Joker style, where they're going out and they're hurting other people, but maybe they display it in a different way. And some things people might do is like they might have some sort of like internal dialogue that's very broken, or maybe they manifest it as a body part that doesn't quite necessarily work, such as conversion disorders and things like that. So an alternative manifestation of trauma is the best way to explain that. And then ultimately, my favorite thing is that, you know, when someone goes in for treatment, is who's going to benefit the most from treatment. You know, we don't want to take a lot of our time and money spending it on someone who's not going to get better. And so even if we start to see a change in somebody, even if we start to show that, hey, with treatment things can get better, and so if we know somebody that isn't going to benefit, maybe we might need to get them to a hospital. But if someone's like, hey, I really do need help, I know I have a lot of problems, and they're willing to work through it, that might be a really good opportunity for them to seek treatment here. And so kind of in a very broad sense, these are a lot of the things that we look at when we're looking at getting somebody mental health help. And just in terms for us today, this is just going to be kind of our judging criteria.
That sounds good. We've all picked in advance and have looked at these to try to get our choices as close to matching these different criteria as possible, and we've all kind of got our formulated arguments, if you will. Zappa will be joining us from the field, and I will go meet him in a little bit, but I'd like to start off presenting my case for none other than Relena Peacecraft, or Relena Darlin, from Gundam Wing, or Dorlin, depending on who pronounces it, which is her adoptive name. But Relena is a world leader, for those of you who are unfamiliar. We see her first in New Mobile Report Gundam Wing at the age of 15 or 16. It's a little shady depending on if you're following the manga or the anime, as there's like a weird slight difference in time, but generally around the same age. And there are some interesting traits throughout the series, including Endless Waltz, and then if we want to consider the manga into Frozen Teardrop, that could be concerning. Now, as far as just trying to meet the criteria, I'll go through that, and then if you have any questions, Taz, we'll kind of go from there.
Sounds good.
So she is generally not directly, well, in some cases, she is directly a threat to others when she's trying to prove a point. But generally speaking, she's very indirectly a threat to others, which doesn't necessarily seem intentional at first, but I believe is very possible, if nothing else, out of kind of a disregard, if you will. Maybe not a purely aggressive act, but more of a neglectful, I'm really not putting that as a priority right now. The first time we largely see this is when she starts to run the Sank Kingdom after being told she is part of the Peacecraft family, the total pacifists that adopted Hero Yui's infamous total pacifism. Unfortunately, of course, they were invaded and killed while Relena was a baby, and likely that event, along with quite a few other events in her life, have left some forms of trauma that have left her displaying some narcissistic tendencies. Now, I'm not saying she's full-blown narcissist by any means, and we're not here to diagnose people, but generally speaking, she shares some of those traits.
Interesting.
Yeah, so with this being a world leader, that is somewhat problematic. Now, of course, there's a fine line walking between having very strong ideals and trying to prioritize human life over it. But that's the way she takes the Sank Kingdom, and not really working any kind of statecraft or diplomacy, ends up getting it invaded again. Which, of course, being a pacifist isn't entirely her fault, but we don't ever get to see on screen any acts of diplomacy, any negotiations or anything. But the Romafella Foundation was trying to prove a point, so they wouldn't have gone anywhere.
It's very interesting that you mentioned that she's a world leader out to hurt other people. And so while, it's very interesting we mentioned that they themselves might not hurt other people, she has the ability to have other people hurt other people. And that's definitely concerning.
Yes, and it's definitely one of the things I don't perceive to be intentional. And she's always shown to be trying her best. And even though she had a fairly superior education growing up because she was the vice foreign minister's daughter, She had access to classes other people wouldn't have at her age. She's still only 16, 17 max in the animation that we see. So she's really not trained to handle diplomacy at this level. She is very influential. She's a very good public speaker. She's good at swaying people in some circumstances. But generally speaking, she's more just inspirational than she is a good diplomat or a good negotiator. So that, I think, gets her in trouble because she blends the two. Now, in terms of being kind of a danger to herself in the same vein, she does a lot of the same stuff. She always, I don't want to say always, but she overestimates herself in a lot of ways, which once again, I think is not inherently something she did on purpose. I think that's just how she was raised, being kind of brought up in a very privileged way. Being the vice foreign minister's daughter gets her a lot of different access. So she believes that she's got this extra level of knowledge that people her age wouldn't, but people her senior would. And then, of course, being a Peacecraft, she has kind of this legacy to live up to. And I think a lot of, and this is, of course, just me posturing, but I think a lot of her trauma comes out of some form of abandonment. Her parents, of course, were killed at a very young age, so it's not likely that she would remember that, but that could still have some effect on her biochemistry, even at a very young age. Even if she's not there to remember it, it is something that could have still stuck with her in terms of just her regular health. Going through, we see her typically really vying for her dad's attention, and of course, being the prior vice foreign minister, was a very busy man, so he could not always give it. So she kind of exhibits that same behavior, trying to get that attention that she's felt she's always missed, which leads her into a situation where he's assassinated and she's kind of there for it, which also a very traumatic event. But she shows that with Hiro in particular, she throws herself in an extreme danger most of the time. When we first meet Hiro washed up on a beach, he steals a ambulance and assaults 2 EMTs. When she sees him at school, she's like, I gotta have a piece of that. I need Hiro Yui in my life. And then he threatens to kill her, and she's like, oh yes, this is going down. I need some Hiro. And then convinces her, I think it's her butler who flies the plane, to fly to Antarctica to stop a mobile suit battle. So I wouldn't say necessarily illogical, because there are, of course, story justifications for these things, but probably, a radio call or something might have also sufficed in that instance. It's hard to say. But generally speaking, throughout the series, even into Endless Waltz, she's doing unnecessarily dangerous things. Even after she's kidnapped by Marimea and Daquin Barton, she's still being super sassy. Even after they're like, look, you're here as a convenience. Like, we want to use you, but if you're going to be a problem, we'll just get rid of you. And she's like, but listen, I'm just saying, you're wrong. And of course, like, very condescending ways to Marimea, who as a child is very not cool with that most of the time. So, as far as a danger to others and herself, once again, not directly for others, but very directly for herself a lot of the time. The refusal of service, I think, is something that'd be interesting, because I don't think she would see that it's a problem. That a lot of people in high-pressure jobs, whether it's diplomatic or in the medical field or in the military, policing, anything like that, some of these traits are super beneficial to what they do and help boost their confidence, but it can also be a double-edged sword, right? That confidence can either be like a Winston Churchill or a Stalin. I'm not saying she's Stalin, but that's kind of the two ends of the spectrum, kind of, in a way.
There's a fine line to walk there.
Exactly, yeah. And I think that just her really being reinforced positively her entire life of like, oh, you're the coolest kid in school, oh, you're Queen Relena, oh, we're gonna let you be vice foreign minister at the age of 17, is something that she's like, oh, well, I'm doing something right, I'm not going to say no. And we never see any of kind of these instances where she tries to walk back these decisions. And like even the Gundam pilots remark that like she's really strong-willed comparatively even to them. So she's really steadfast in her ideals, and that can be problematic not only for leading a country but also trying to realize you may have a problem that you may need to look at. And for her, I mean, it's definitely not like her fault that she has these traumas, but just not realizing you have those traumas is kind of the first real big hurdle you have to get over.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot to unpack there. And I think if we start off looking at some of the things you were mentioning earlier, you know, like the attention from her parent, like with seeking the attention from her dad, even though like her parents were killed at a very young age, can kind of really make her feel like she wants to try to interpret what they meant and maybe interpret it incorrectly and ultimately lead to, you know, other people being put in harm's way. I also noticed like a lot when you're talking about she does take unnecessary risks putting herself in that situation. And, you know, as you mentioned, she's only 15. And so a lot of children, you know, I'm sure I probably did this when I was younger too, but looking at that, you know, that teen invulnerability, you know, like, oh, I know that I'm fine. I'll be fine. And I think, you know, having that privilege has enabled her to make her feel like, you know, what she is doing is correct. And, you know, not a lot of kids are going to have, you know, round the clock service, round the clock security to make sure that, you know, even if she does something less than ideal, that it's going to come back at her at all, versus, you know, someone else on the streets might try something like that. And because they don't have that extra privilege around them, they might get seriously hurt. And so I see a lot of how her trying to come into her own as a teenager, but also still just being a teenager, she is really kind of putting herself out there for, you know, getting herself hurt, but also others hurt because she has that royal family behind her. So definitely would be a good candidate based on the threat to others. I think, as you mentioned, because it's not so directly from her hurting other people and putting other people in a situation that might get them hurt or hurt other people, I don't see that as much of a big concern. I definitely do see that concern of her being risky in her actions. Like you had mentioned how she was abducted, but she still has kind of a bit of an attitude. And like you said in the very first episode that we see her, you know, she sees a dude down on the beach take an ambulance, and the next day sees him at school and is just like, I gotta go up and say hi. You know, if I see somebody that I saw do something like that and I see him again, I'm probably gonna clear to the other side of campus and be like, I don't want any part of that. And so yeah, looking at a lot of her behaviors, I do see that she has a lot of potential to get herself hurt, and in that, if she does, a lot of the people behind her might react poorly to that, or they might react rashly to that and therefore go out and hurt other people. So hers is a very peculiar situation because she has that air of authority about her, being born into a royal family. So very interesting pick. I'm interested to see what everyone else has.
Yeah, she sounds like that typical teenager where they're looking for the new experiences but don't realize the consequences to what they're doing.
Yeah, and we call that frontal lobe development. We have the ability to make the decisions, but we don't have the ability to think out what would happen if we do.
And she also has the abuse by proxy, where she can make, you know, somebody else do the hurting so she doesn't have to do it directly.
Yeah, and it kind of keeps it clear out of her mind that, you know, like it was my order, but I didn't do it myself, and that can be very dangerous.
Yeah, I didn't pick up the gun and shoot him, so no guilt on me, right?
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, definitely interesting pick. I'm interested to hear what everyone else has, too. So I'm having fun already. I'm taking notes on the side, too. This is awesome.
I'd also like to point out that she is a true pacifist, where it's about the message and not necessarily about survival. We also see many examples of this, not just when Hiro points a gun at her. He also launches the wing's shield at her and barely misses her shoulder. That's how much resolve the young woman has.
Yeah, I mean, if I remember correctly, he did that to save her from, like, rubble, right?
Oh, yeah, there was that too, but it was just that whole scene was like, okay, contest to wills.
Yeah, from her perspective, she's like, well, I'm about to get got either way. I guess Hiro's the better way.
Pretty much.
Did she even flinch?
No, she didn't.
Oh.
That was the crazy part.
Okay.
Yeah, like, she's real. Like, she'll stare down a shield. She don't care. She's like, she's the Garrett Rand of this series. She's like, I'll fight a mobile suit. Let me do it.
That is one woman. Yeah, that is one woman who could out crazy the Joker.
Yeah, staring contest. She's gonna win somehow. She
Just
will
throw
not
her in
win.
a vat of chemicals and she's there.
Yeah, I said it. I went there. You can blow me up in the comments if you want. I went there.
Now, speaking of other picks, Zappa, as I mentioned, is off-site, so I actually went to go visit him at Side 8, and, well, this is what happened. And we are heading over to Side 8 to check on Zappa, get a status report on what's going on, and we are coming in now. Zappa, can you hear me?
Yeah. You're coming through pretty clear today. That's that 5G, right?
You know, 5G carries really well out here in space.
It sure does. No interference. I hope you brought snacks, because there's definitely a food shortage out here in Gaia.
Oh, what's going on in Gaia?
Just they're having a hard time with food. They're researching bioluminescence or some such. It's not robot science, so I wasn't really paying any mind to it.
Okay, it sounds almost like they could use a savior.
A savior of some kind of Gundam, some kind of G savior, perhaps.
And there's the G savior plug. We did it, guys. We're here. We just mark that off the list. We can retire. We're good.
All right, good. Recording over. Good job, team. Good job.
Thanks for tuning in, and we're out. We're not actually. We have other things to talk about. So, as you heard Taz explain, we are representing an individual character from the Gundam universe for some kind of psychiatric care. Now, of course, this will vary depending on each character, as they will have different needs. But, Zappa, why don't you tell us who you've picked?
I've chosen known crazy woman, antagonist villain. I don't know why I say protagonist. Antagonist villain, very much seen as not in a good light. Katejina Loos from Victory Gundam.
Ooh, okay. So give us a little background, because myself included, I haven't watched Victory all the way through, and a lot of people I know haven't.
So I think the easiest way most people would have come across Katejina is before the advent of getting all the anime on disc here in the U.S. Dynasty Warriors Gundam would always bring Katejina as Uso's foil. He is the protagonist, she is the visualized main antagonist. She was originally a pen pal of his way back when the series starts, but as, war is beginning, she and Uso are both caught up in things. They both end up getting sort of drafted into the League military. I guess she was just kind of there because the other option was being stuck in the city and smushed to death, and Uso wasn't having his pen pal getting shot down. At some juncture, Katejina is captured, even though it's hard to say if she kind of walked into it or if she just happened to get captured, because she was getting fed up with the League Militaire always having to fall back on Uso as their main guy. It's like, hey, we have problem. Uso, you fix it. Uso, you fix it. Uso, you're 13. Get in the Gundam. Go fix it. So she got fed up, and as she was captured and kidnapped, she ends up joining the Zanskar Empire and becoming one of their ace pilots and doing a whole lot of dirty while she's in there.
Okay, so it's pretty interesting in terms of Gundam. You don't really see that a lot that I can think of off the top of my head, at least.
I can't think of any other case other than that. Female characters, changing sides due to a guy is not that unusual. You see it a few times in Zeta Gundam, but you also see it go the other way with, Rekkoa going to one side, Emma coming to the other, 4 and Rosami are in kind of that nebulous zone until, the Legend of Zeta happens.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I guess that would... It's similar. I don't know. Yeah, not as, I would say, pivotal as of a character as it sounds like Miss Loos is. But yeah, definitely he'd stay at Gundam. There's a couple of different instances where people are like, yeah, I'm gonna go over here and hang out. That sounds cool.
Yeah.
I mean, Paptimus is pretty attractive, so.
Yeah, you know, he's got that charm, that je ne sais quoi.
Yeah, he's super smooth. And he has all the weird mobile suits. But in terms of her psychiatric care, we're going to go down the list just as Tazzy kind of explained. Is Miss Loos a threat to others?
Well, she is a pilot, so by default, yes. But I think that's probably way too easy of an answer, isn't it?
A little bit. I'd say that's kind of a give me, but if there are other things...
So, aside from her increasing obsession, or seeming obsession with wanting to kill Uso, because I guess he still has some lingering affection for her. They're not that far in age difference. He's 13, she's 17, so, you know, that weird teenage romance thing can it can get awkward. Mm-hmm. So, beyond her insistence on killing him because he is getting annoying, there is an infamous scene, you can actually look this up at any point in your free time. It is something along the lines of the Bikini Babe Death Squad.
Yeah, I've seen this. It's
wherein cool. Katejina arranges for a squad of about, I think, 6 to 10 female pilots in space helmets but in bikinis to go out in the colony and deliberately go forth and try to shoot down Uso with rocket launchers and RPGs. And knowing that Uso seems to have some kind of problem with older women, like his, weird teenage feelings, like mature women, bikinis, what do I do?
Yeah.
She sends out this squad to attack a mobile suit effectively on foot. I say that with air quotes, on foot.
Yeah.
But the end result is something beforehand happens and Uso thinks he's hallucinating. It's like, no, this isn't real. So he's firing back, not realizing that these are real people, and swinging his beam saber about. And Katejina effectively just sent 6 to 10 women to their death just because, no, Uso needs to die. No, this boy needs to die. Go. She's throwing bodies at Uso. Like, she's putting other people in danger for her own revenge.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I mean, like, straight ordering someone to go after a Gundam with an RPG in... I mean, it really wouldn't matter if they had protective gear anyway, but, like, in bikinis is definitely not the most sane thing to do, I would say. I feel like it's a very diabolical thing to do to somebody.
It is, yeah. I know I kind of rambled and prattled on, but she's definitely throwing people out for her own revenge.
Yeah, I mean, not that it would. I mean, I guess it'd be technically a war crime, but those were her allies, her comrades, if you will. I would suppose, not like prisoners of war, just random people she recruited, right?
No, they're definitely soldiers of the Zanskar Empire, and I believe at that point they work under her because they're more than eager to go out there and shoot down a 13-year-old with a rocket launcher.
So definitely not the best strategy, to say the least.
No, but a memorable one.
Yeah, you're not kidding. It is. I think that is. It's the only scene I can remember vividly from Victory, from what I've seen of it. It's very standout, if you will. Now, in terms of harm to others, there's also the harm to herself. So, what does she do that would be putting her in danger?
I mean, again, there's the default, baseline. She is a pilot. She's automatically putting herself out there. But can't think of any particular instance where she's deliberately like putting herself in like a specific kind of danger. I don't think she ever resorts to any sort of like damsel in distress anti-tactic, like using herself as bait. I don't think she goes that far.
Because like I said, I'm really fuzzy with victory lore. When she becomes a mobile suit pilot after joining the Zanskar Empire, right?
She
or did she pilot for the League?
I think at best she may have like backseat or shotgun in a core fighter, or I remember very early in the series she either mans a gun like a what am I looking stationary artillery, or it's just like a laser guider, like I apologize for my stammering. Goodness. You see in some scenes when the ships in Gundam are docking, those dotted lines in the air, she's probably sitting at one of the... It's either a stationary artillery or one of those trying to guide Uso over to get extra parts. But the point is, up until her capture by Chronicle Asher, she's not really piloting anything noteworthy or of value.
Okay, because that's kind of a rare thing. We don't usually in Gundam get to see someone like actively decide to take the role of a pilot, which kind of maybe brings into question, like, instead of people who are already established or at least vaguely trained pilots or pilots out of necessity, that maybe her becoming a pilot is more so putting herself in danger out of some other reason instead of like, oh, I want to fight for the Zanskar Empire. Maybe it's something else.
Yeah, like there is that other reason. Since you bring that up, she's captured by the this series Char clone Chronicle Asher, and Chronicle has from the very beginning been constantly embarrassed by a 13-year-old child in mobile suit combat, constantly shot down, defeated, much like Jared and Camille are.
Mm-hmm.
So, she is captured by the Zanskar Empire, and Katejina becomes infatuated with him. And since he already has this, revenge in mind, like, Uso is my rival, I must defeat my rival, she takes that unto herself and starts piloting, which, further contributes to her Uso is annoying, kill Uso agenda that increases through the series. So for some reason, and I'm not the expert here, I think she catches a little bit of Stockholm syndrome, because why would you take on your captor's interest all of a sudden? Like if your friend here becomes your enemy because your captor doesn't like him. There's a little something else going on there, and that's not something that I know how to identify.
Yeah, that is something that is really interesting, because that's another, like, fairly, I don't say exclusive thing, but, like, you don't see that in a lot of other characters for the most part. Like, you have the side switching in Zeta, and maybe there's some of that with maybe Paptimus, but, like, that's, like, you don't really see a lot of people getting captured and then being like, oh, I'm super gonna pilot for you because you're the coolest person ever. At least that I can remember. I mean, there's probably another instance, or there's one in a manga somewhere, but generally speaking, it doesn't happen a lot.
Yeah, I think you might have to start scouring manga for that concept, because I can't think of any.
Yeah, at least not off the top of our head.
Right.
So the next thing is, so in any of these dangerous behaviors for herself or others, or anything like the Stockholm Syndrome, would she be really likely to continue showing these kinds of behaviors without any kind of intervention or psychiatric care?
Would she keep doing this if she didn't get some kind of... Probably so. And this is just the case of how things like run to the end. She Chronicle is defeated at some juncture, and she goes into super revenge to a point that it like borderline awakens a bit of new type, and she and Uso, you know, of course they have to come to blows in the final scenes before she is left to her fate. You know, unlike most, you know, final bosses in a Gundam series, she actually survives through to the end. But I think that's hard to say, because I have like an external example, but that takes things away from being within the series itself and over into the case of other video games being Super Robot Wars, if I may.
Yeah, I mean, like, as far as, I mean, because when I get to mine, I'm going to end up, like, referencing some manga that's probably not even close to canon, so...
Okay.
Well,
So-
yeah, Phil, just jump into it.
So, in Victory Gundam doesn't get to show up in very many Super Robot Wars. I think there's only 2 or 3. And one of those is on the Game Boy. It's Super Robot Wars 2G. And this is the first time that Victory Gundam gets to be in the franchise, so they put a lot of effort into showing even, like, the smaller concepts and scenes going on. And Katejina's always there in the background. Uso gets caught in a battle. Katejina's, like, always around. She's got a few lines here and there. And there's decisions you can make in the game that can turn Katejina into an enemy. It's like, some of your allies are also captured by the enemy. It's like, do you choose to shoot down your ally because they're in your way? That's what you have to do. Do you choose to ignore trying to save someone like 4? Like, the more of these destructive decisions you make, the more she sits there and she's like, no, y'all are a bunch of hypocrites. Y'all are a bunch of jerks using children as weapons of war, to a point where she allows herself to get caught and she starts becoming an enemy from there on. So I want to draw that parallel to say that there's probably points, like, before she's captured, that an intervention could have, like, stopped any of that from happening. You know, if she had were to completely be removed from the situation, or if they were to stop and sit down and maybe not rely on Uso so much, there's things that could be done that would have probably stopped her from reaching this point. But I think once she's captured, she's with the Zanskar Empire, they don't seem to do anything to hold her back. So, if anything, they're enabling her to, you know, get worse and worse and kind of become a crazy bitch by the end.
Yeah, there's like, because it sounds like if for a prisoner of war, they're pretty chill with like, yeah, sure, whatever, you can pilot a mobile suit, we don't care.
Yeah, there's clearly some detail that I'm missing in there. Like, she is captured, yes, but what are the dialogues that happen shortly thereafter that allow her to not become a prisoner and instead become one of their top aces?
Yeah, because that is something that's real weird. I'm sure that, like, if she was already an ace pilot, maybe there's that kind of possibility, but to, like, have her train up and do that, I mean, maybe they were just like, this is a great, like, weird psychological warfare thing for Uso if they knew kind of her relation to her. But it does sound like had something kind of happened prior to her getting captured, or if the Zanskar Empire was like maybe not trying to, well, just be kind of evil, it sounds like.
Yeah, or just Chronicle himself not enabling her with his revenge plot against him.
Yeah, that there definitely could have maybe been a difference, because it at least sounds like we hear that play out in some form or fashion in Super Robot Wars, which, well, isn't canon, is kind of a good measure of that character placed in a different circumstance that we would not get to see in animation.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But at least we can see at the end that she survives, and anything that happened involving her and Uso no longer exists in her mind anymore. She's not like a complete amnesiac, but it seems that anything pertaining to Uso, the League military, the Zanskar, the whole war that she went through, she doesn't remember a thing. So she's like reset to probably a point before even becoming pen pals with the kid. And she's blind. So there's, there's a possibility of redemption, but at the same time, now it's like she has to live in a world of her own consequences and not be aware of what she's done.
Okay, yeah. So, I mean, even though it almost kind of sounds like in a way she got to... it's because it's really not making progress, I would say, but kind of reverting back to a prior save state, if we will, that may have been corrupted. But at least she has let a lot of that rage go, just because there's no concept of Uso in her mind. But it definitely sounds like a lot of that possibly could have been avoided. I mean, of course, it's always hard to tell with these things, and we're not making diagnoses on these characters, but generally speaking, like, she goes from being at least a somewhat sympathetic character, a supporting character that you kind of have some relation to getting to see that entire descent down into madness, if you will, which is, I have to say, one of the, like, best in, like, writing terms of awakenings for a new type is just rage-induced awakening. But it is something that there's a, like, it is really hard because you don't see this in a lot of other characters to kind of deduce or make assumptions off of, but that kind of possibility of the Stockholm Syndrome setting in with Chronicle and her kind of adopting that revenge plot, if you will, does sound like something that if either side had really kind of given her this opportunity for psychiatric care, she probably would have kind of mellowed back out, or at least been able to cope with what she had seen done to Uso and what the Zanskar Empire had been doing, and maybe kind of gotten to a point where she could live like a regular life without having this, like, just constant gnawing rage at Uso for some reason.
Yeah. In a way, like, I mean, this is just drawing, like, picking out a piece of sand out of the desert. Like, she got away with everything. Like, she gets to do all this crazy madness and all this insanity and unnecessary violence, throwing bodies at Uso and Gundams. And at the end of the series, like, oh, don't remember it? Can't see it? Oh, who's this kid approaching me at the end? I don't know who this 13-year-old child is. I don't even see them. It's like, which way to this city now? And that in itself doesn't say much to Uso's character at the end, and he has his own mountain of problems to deal with. But I think as a whole, the series was one of those outlets for Tomino, because word on the block was he was going through a lot of stuff when he was writing Victory Gundam, so that's how that came out so dark and so, like, dreary. And Kill 'Em All Tomino rears his angry head and shed a tear. The world shuddered.
Yeah, isn't Victory, maybe not the most, but isn't it, like, really high up there in terms of, like, its actual named character kill count?
I think it exceeds Zeta probably by a dozen.
Okay,
you have the entirety of the Strike Team, half of Uso's friends, every villain, most of the main characters. You see Uso's mom get, like, splattered by a battleship. Like a battleship. You shouldn't have a body, like, hit a battleship and have a singular part of their body pop off.
Yeah,
A child should not carry his mother's head in a helmet. And then the next episode, everything seems fine. No, he should be crying on the floor, like, soaked in sweat and tears. Why is he in the robot in the next episode? Stop it.
Yeah, there's a lot going on in Victory, to say the least.
Right, but we're not here to analyze that. We're here to see if we can get Katejina Loos some treatment, right?
Yes, and with all of this being said and all this knowledge gained, the status report given, I'm going to head back to our headquarters to give the information to the other guys and try to answer any questions as like a pseudo Zappa in a way.
An official representative of the Axis Communication and Entertainment family.
Yes, I'm like an ambassador, basically.
Hey, you gotta do what you gotta do, man.
You know, I wear many hats. A lot of.
I'm gonna steal one of your hats one day.
Hats. I'm just a guy with like 4 different hats at one time. But I'm gonna head back there and see what everyone else says, and we will be seeing you soon.
All right, be safe out there.
Today's episode is sponsored in part by you and the Gunpla Network web shop through Teespring. You can find it at gunpla-network-hanger-0059.creator-spring.com. Come and check out our merch store and choose to get your product styled in one of several different franchises, from Gundam Wing to 00 to Unicorn and Build Fighters. Our most recent addition has been Network Chan. Everything purchased goes back into providing you, our viewers, more content like this. Now back to the episode.
We should also mention that that whole big long URL, you don't have to type in. We'll put the link in the description below. And if you're watching on desktop on YouTube, there will be a little banner for it as well.
Wow, so Zappa's pick's definitely a very interesting one. When you look at Katejina and her fixation on trying to kill this one person, you know, you can definitely see that, you know, there's this perseveration as far as just focusing on one thing. And when it comes to mental health, you know, that idea of just focusing on one thing consistently and letting that dominate majority of your life into even just how you make your choices really plays into just kind of showing how sometimes when you are so dedicated to something, how it can really just take over your life. It takes over everything that you do, and that really looks like a mental health condition, because you're now putting off regular normal relationships that you can have with somebody, or even just anybody in general, because you're so focused on this one thing. Now, one of the other things I can see that being very dangerous about her is that, you know, while it is only focused on one person in the series that he's talking about, imagine if that were translated to, you know, I need to focus on this large group of people, whether it be civilians or other units or even just colonies altogether, is that when she focuses so hard on achieving that goal, you know, we could see that if it was just translated from one person to many people, we could see how dangerous that can really be. Now, as far as being a direct threat to herself, we see that, you know, she's willing to go out with basically no armor to go fight a mobile suit. And, you know, I don't think any rational person would try to do that, you know, and it doesn't seem like she has the training to be a specific unit. And to make a comparison to like a unit that goes out, you know, like tank hunters and things like that, where their specific role is to do those sorts of things, it doesn't seem like that group that she's put together was really the type of group that was meant to go out and do those things. And so even with them, they have the ability to, you know, make sure that they're able to retreat. They have the ability to cover themselves so that they're able to get out of harm's way relatively safely. But with what they're doing is literally just flying in and trying to achieve this mission. It's everything or nothing. Very thinking of trying to achieve it in that sense is very dangerous. And I can see how putting herself in that situation, even now putting others in that situation, could really make her a very dangerous pick and would definitely require some sort of help. Now, if we're looking at Zappa's character after everything has ended and she's now in the state of, you know, amnesia, and she lost her sight, and this kind of ties into the other idea that we talked about real briefly of manifesting in other ways, is that, you know, what is it possible that her trauma is being repressed in that way, and now she's no longer able to remember these things? But that doesn't mean that the trauma is gone. It doesn't mean that it's wiped completely out of her memory. And maybe it is, and we don't know the Gundam series too well enough to know the truth, but if we were to take kind of normal psychological practice and normal psychology into the situation, and we look at her character at that point, we can definitely say that maybe she might not need counseling at the time, but she would definitely need monitoring in case either she snaps to and regains those lost memories. And then we also want to make sure that, as she's going through life with this new situation and understanding it, is like, while she doesn't understand what happened to her, is she still able to process what's going on around her normally? So I definitely think Zappa's pick is very interesting, and I definitely think that, if we were talking about her pre-losing her sight and pre-amnesia state, she definitely would benefit from it, and seeing that how she's really focused on that one thought. And if we can change that simple thought of just like, maybe this is a little out of hand here, and just changing that thought, it might benefit her to do those things. If we're talking about post her losing her sight and her memories, it might just be good to just kind of monitor her. So I think what I'll do to give her the best possible chance for admission would be, we'll take it right before she loses all of her sight and her memory, so then that way it gives her the best shot of one, achieving some sort of release maybe, and hopefully not have to lose her sight and her memories. So awesome pick, Zappa. I'm interested to hear what everyone else has.
We've heard from myself, we've heard from Zappa. Chris, would you like to tell us who you're representing today?
Yes, my pick is Lalah Sune from Mobile Suit Gundam, or Lalah Sune, depending on which article you read. Taz, are you familiar with her at all? Or
I am not familiar, so it's going to be interesting to hear what you got.
Okay, have you seen Mobile Suit Gundam, the original series? Or
I have not.
Okay, I'll try to sum this up here for you. So, you of course know who Char Aznable is.
Of course, I know Char.
Okay, sure, right. I was mispronouncing.
It's all right.
Tisk.
It's my Canadian accent.
I am insulted.
Well, too bad. Anyway.
Tell me about Lalah.
Okay, Lalah was a new type that Char had discovered in an Indian brothel. And he recognized right away that she was a new type. So he decided to take her under his wing and use her to his advantage. So the reason I chose her, because she was absolutely and totally devoted to Char, and only knew Char, so she couldn't see the other side of the coin. So later on in the series, she comes across Amuro, and they actually have a battle together, but they don't realize who they're actually fighting. It's just Mobile Suit versus Mobile Suit. She has this specially made mobile armor that Char made for her called the Elmith, which, how can I describe it?
It's a giant Winnebago with remote weapons.
Why, thank you. Yes, it uses, I guess, an early version of funnels?
Yeah, they're bits.
Bits. Funnels, bits. And she controls them, and it's... I don't want to call it a Saikamu.
It is Saikamu.
Mobile armor? Oh, it is Saikamu? I guess it's a first gen Saikamu?
It's the first true Saikamu mobile armor.
And because
She was second mom, really. Almost. That's how we
saw
her.
Also at the same time, it was like a trophy for him as well. It's like, I found her, she was nothing, I made her what she is today, and look what I built, kind of thing.
Oh yeah, totally.
Yeah,
it is really interesting. Plays. Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, it's an interesting kind of contrast between Zappa's pick, Ms. Loos from Victory Gundam, who also was likely kind of some kind of Stockholm syndrome, but like ran it through to the end of like, she just took that vengeance, whereas Lalah kind of realizes what's happening and tries to escape, but doesn't have any options. So it is interesting to see the contrast there.
Lalah's more of a victim than a protagonist, I guess.
Yeah, I think the big interesting thing to look at is how, we said she was found in a brothel. So I mean, having, understanding like what it's like to be somebody who works in a brothel. I haven't done it, but understanding that people who have gone through those things, gone through those traumas, not necessarily are always by choice there, and that can definitely play into it. And so, when you have that savior complex, when Char comes in and saves her, saves her, I put in air quotes, because like does he really save her when he then uses her to do a lot of these things? And then you can see how her just blind following of him because she feels like he rescued her, that mentality of I will do anything, I will make sure that whatever his dreams are will come true, that can be very dangerous when he says, all right, this is what we have to do, and you put so many people in front of her that she's like, that's what you got to do, especially in such a huge mobile armor. Now that I see it, it's like, it's
quite large.
Yeah. It's dangerous, and if what's to stop him from saying, all right, let's turn it to these people now, civilians. It's if she truly believes that's what he would want, it can be very dangerous. So I'm going to look at it from this part where she is blindly following Char, not quite followed Amuro, because that's when you start to see a lot of the change and understanding inside of her character, which I know is a big part of it. But if we look at just that part alone, it's very dangerous. But then when you add in the part of having Amuro come in, we start to see a lot of like what I like to refer to as like Juliet syndrome, where it's like the only way out of this is through death, and
yes,
that kind of thinking obviously is not very logical thinking, because there are 1.5 million other ways to get out of it. She could just disappear and become a whole new person, but that's besides the point. The idea that she doesn't have the ability to see outside of that, and that could be that trauma coming back up from when she was in a brothel, where she was in one situation she couldn't escapes once with Char. It's just like, I did it once, there's no way I can do it again. And so that's why she might believe that that is the only way out. And so if we take all of these things up until right before the moment of her death, we could definitely see somebody who's not very stable and at any point can flip in one direction or the other. And so this is a very interesting pick as far as a threat to themselves. And I can see when we start talking about some of the other criteria, how this will definitely play into it. So great pick. I'm interested to see our last pick here.
You made two really good points I just want to comment on.
Go for it.
When she was quote unquote saved from the brothel, she wasn't really saved. She was kind of just, she had a subservient position in the brothel, and then she didn't see it that way, but she was in a subservient position to Char, right? She was a subordinate. But from her perspective, I guess she was having a relationship with Char.
And
I don't know if it was a physical relationship but it was definitely a relationship of some kind.
I think the interesting thing would be to look at is it's not what the relationship was on the outside, is how did she perceive that relationship? Because if she sees it as like, I'm his equal, but I am his sword, that can definitely be a lot more dangerous versus someone who realizes, hey, I'm just following orders.
Yeah, after he grabbed her out of the brothel, she absolutely idolized him.
Yeah, and
like almost like a rock star,
Yeah, and we can already see how dangerous that has become. Being able to pilot this mobile armor with, very, 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 huge armaments from what I can see.
And the other point you made is that she couldn't get out of the relationship without dying.
Mm-hmm.
The Juliet syndrome that you mentioned.
Not an actual diagnosis, but I'd like to refer to it as that.
No, that's perfect, because she literally cannot get out of the relationship with Char because they're both new types, and no matter where she goes and where she hides, he can track her down using the new type powers, because they have that other plane of existence they can connect on, and he can always find her.
Ill-defined space magic.
Yeah. So she literally had to, well, then then when she dies, they touch on the thing that she doesn't really die, but evolves into the next, interesting character.
Definitely an interesting character. And I think like if we were to look at it up to the point before she's no longer existing in the plane that we perceive, it's definitely somebody who I'd feel like would be a good candidate too. So yeah, that's definitely a good pick. And so it's great.
And I just want to go over some of the criteria here. Threat of harm to others and disregard for property. Well, because she idolized Char so greatly, she would basically do anything that he said. So he sent her on a mission to attack Solomon, so she got the nickname the Ghost of Solomon. I think, in regards to most likely to refuse service, I think she would like to be committed, but she would know that she couldn't get completely away from Shar. So I guess to keep him, quote unquote, happy, she would refuse service because he would, come and blow the place up and come and get her anyway, right?
Yeah, and even if Shar says, no, you don't need it, and she firmly believes she won't need it then. And so, when their conviction is that strong, it's hard to get somebody to receive service when their conviction is that strong. However, as time goes on, or the more she starts to sit, if, like you mentioned with Amuro coming around, like, she did start to see a change. She did start to see that there's another side to the coin. She started to make those realizations. So initially, she would have been very hard to service, but as time started to wear on, we could see she definitely would fit the criteria of benefiting very well from this sort of thing.
Yeah, she was like the tip of the triangle between Amuro and Shar. Very, difficult position to be in. I do believe she did suffer a lot of trauma, even though she probably didn't realize it herself. At the end there, because she was being torn between seeing how good Amuro was, and then she finally kind of started to see what Shar was actually like, even though at the same time she was still idolizing him greatly.
Right, and so one of the big things that we talk about in psychology is cognitive dissonance, where you believe one thing and you see another thing and they don't quite line up. And that in and of itself causes a lot of stress for people, even when you're just like, I want to be a good person, but the things that I do aren't good, but I think I'm a good person. Those sorts of like thoughts, those sorts of just thought experiments or just clashes in our own thoughts can really have a lot of stress and anxiety on a person and can cause them to either act out or even just shut down altogether. And so, again, Lalah, really great pick.
Yeah, and I think she would have benefited from the treatment very well, and she probably would have responded very well too.
Especially when you start to factor in the part about Amuro where she saw him and saw that, the Shar isn't the only thing out there. And I think, even with the new type ability, even if Shar were to find her halfway across the universe, if she went to treatment, she got the help, she could see him and, not have those feelings again. It might pop up every once in a while, but she'd have the ability, the tools that you learn in treatment to, okay, I see him again. This isn't the same situation. I'm not going to go back to the person I was.
Exactly, yeah. And she was definitely a victim of Char.
Awesome. Man, this is fun. I'm having fun with this.
I'm glad you're having fun. I hope I explained that well.
Oh yeah, no, this is great. I definitely think Lalah would be definitely a good candidate. We still got one more candidate to go, so I'm definitely excited to hear the last one.
Oh boy, is it my turn? Yay, it's my turn. Okay, so this is probably going to be a little bit drawn out too, because I picked somebody who, unless you are a super duper Zeta Gundam era nerd, you've probably never heard of her because she's only been in manga. The individual I'm nominating as a candidate is Asuna Elmarit. Asuna, outside of in-character stuff, couple of fun our world notes. She's only the second female protagonist character ever actually written in Gundam. So that's actually surprising in and of itself. And yes, I picked a protagonist. I'm apparently weird and different. I'd also like to point out that she's probably the only character that started out kinda well-adjusted. Actually, no, that's a lie. Katejina's probably started out well-adjusted too, but we saw how that went. Okay, back into Gundam World stuff. So, a few things about Asuna before I delve into her trauma and her life experiences. She is terrifying in both Zaku and a Kampfer. She's also apparently really, really tough to shoot down in a Rick Diaz. And because of how things end up going, she even has a personalized Gundam that was built using her piloting telemetry of all things. Another thing from her life is, while at school and then later in war, she had a really nasty bully / rival who would actually become a cyber new type that actually would pose another kind of terrible challenge later. This girl definitely has daddy issues. Whether she knows about them or not, I will touch on that more in a little bit, for different reasons than you might expect. And my God, if she does not have PTSD after the career she's had so far, from what I've read, where I'm cutting the story at for her, I would be amazed.
Pat, what manga is she from? I know she's from at least Echo del Ciel.
Okay, slow down.
École du
It's
Ciel.
pronounced École du Ciel.
Thank you. Not French at all. So.
No, since I'm the only guy here who apparently speaks French at all.
Whoa.
I took a little
Easy
in high
now.
school.
Easy now. École du Ciel. Franco-Manitoba.
Du Ciel. You're like almost speaking Joao, which, you know what? I'll let it go. Never mind.
Just let it go.
yeah.
Let it go.
Right,
Let it go.
let's get back
Okay.
to it.
Okay, so
Let it go.
yes. Asuna is the protagonist of École du Ciel, which is a fantastic manga. The first two-thirds of it have been translated into English. Great read. Back to In-Universe. In terms of notes I've taken on, she is a new type whose abilities were awoken through extreme emotional duress. She ended up actually watching her not boyfriend, by the name of Shin Barnak, get killed for her sake, which actually drove her into a berserker state. And in that state of new type awakening, she shot down 5 mobile suits single-handedly in a skirmish in the span of about 3 minutes. As a young child, she was used as a new type experiment guinea pig by her quote-unquote father, Professor Elmarit. So while she thought she might have had an average childhood, she didn't have anything remotely close to an average childhood growing up, due to being a bit of a lab rat. She was always being put through some kind of new type testing because her father, quote unquote, was one of the premier new type research scientists in Zeon at the time during the 1 Year War. During her time at the actual academy known as École du Ciel in Montreal, she was actually with her biological father for her stint at the academy, even though she didn't know that he was her biological father. That, of course, was this cool dude named Yahagi. École du Ciel was one of several military boarding schools that was developed with teenagers looking for an education and volunteering into active military service upon graduation as an offset to their schooling and training costs. But this actually served as a means for the then secretive Titans, because they weren't officially a thing yet, to conduct their own experiments in terms of attempting to farm new types. Asuna was one of these special crops because of her highly classified past, according to senior administrators. That being said, she was actually a well-adjusted 15-year-old girl, dealt with a lot of peer pressure and bullying at school, usually from a particular rival, whose name was Elegia. Her not boyfriend spent lots of time with him, and her mobile suit piloting instructor, Yahagi Franzabak, who had not been revealed to her as being her biological father, and he was also a new type. Her biological dad was actually a test pilot for one of the test platforms for what would become the Zeong. I think it was either the MSN-01 or it was the Saikomu Test Zaku, one of those two. Can't remember off the top of my head. Oh, it was a Saikomu Test Zaku. I'm glad I have notes. Saikomu System Zaku, which was one of several experimental machines that culminated in the Xiong. This particular Zaku used wire-guided beam hands and the Saikomu system. So, yeah, her real dad was hot stuff. As training exercises that she would take part in for school were growing increasingly dangerous for reasons that were unknown to even the staff at the time, like the robot gun tanks that were supposed to be loaded with dummy rounds had live high explosive ammo in them, sort of thing. They would eventually go to space and start doing exercises in space. Lost my place here. It would culminate eventually into what would be a space pirate attack that would ultimately destroy two Salamis-class escorts. The pirates withdraw, and a shattered Asuna discovers upon her return that the Salamis attack incident was a plot by... I wrote that poorly. A plot project for the Titans to identify, develop, and monopolize both civilian and military new types. At that point, Asuna actually fled École du Ciel and went missing. And by that, she had literally hijacked a Jim Canard and left. Just floated up into space. She ended up being rescued and then later on working for the same space pirates that actually had attacked the very Federation battle group that she had been with at the time of her new type awakening. There was a lot of tension for a little while between both she and the pirates after they realized who each other was. Of course, pirates recognized her first, but they felt, I suppose, a little bit less personally about it because they were paid to do a job, right? The Titans had paid them to attack the battle group there for the exercise by the Titans, no less, naturally. But again, they got slighted by their employers and never got actually paid. So she can at least be useful around the ship. So we would eventually see her, she was put to work doing all the Joe jobs. She'd be mopping the decks, cleaning rooms, that sort of thing. Pardon me. Eventually, she even started piloting mobile suits once they decided she was trustworthy enough. But during her time as a space pirate, she had made the conscious decision that she would fight in mobile suit combat to disable only, no longer to kill. Afterwards, during her time as a space pirate, she's been kidnapped briefly by the Titans and managed to escape with her and her comrades' lives. She had been challenged to a duel at the Anaheim Electronics Complex by the man who would be her new not boyfriend, a fellow by the name of Jack Bayard or Jack Baird, depending on which English translation version you're looking at. All over getting to do some test piloting of one of the recently captured Gundam Mark IIs, thanks to Camille Bidan, that were hand-delivered from the Argama, no less. She had learned by this point that her mother had been kidnapped by the Titans to lure her out. At the same time, she had witnessed her space pirate mentor, the captain named Marie, taking a kill shot meant for her. So that's another person who died for her in front of her. And she ended up joining the AU soon after that. During her early time with the AUG. She saw heavy combat during what we know as the Day of Dakar, the event where Shar Aznavour had appeared at the Federation Summit and given his speech in place of the recently assassinated Commodore Blex Forer. Camille and Amuro may have been fighting on the ground to protect the uplink, on the side of Earth, but Asuna and Jack were ordered to attack a Titan's jamming satellite to ensure the broadcast would make it further out into space to the rest of the colonies. They ended up having to fight a modified Gunpla that terribly outclassed the Rick Diaz she was using at the time, and she nearly died, if not for her not boyfriend, Jack. Yeah, you can see there's a lot of combat veteran stuff here. She was forced to watch more of her own subordinates die for her sake in another combat mission immediately after that against the Titans, because due to circumstances, there was just no time to actually repair her Rick Diaz from the previous battle. And somehow, whatever was going on with the Titan's vessel that was part of that following attack is when she got her Gundam, known as Le Cygne, which is the swan in French, if you were curious. Yes, there's a theme here. Duck becomes a swan. It's all about the ugly duckling. It's rather poetic.
That's awesome.
Yeah. That's as far as the story goes from what I've been able to look at so far. She has seen a lot of action in 2 years and a lot of trauma.
Yeah, and so, one of the things that we look at, especially when it comes to like military veterans, is just how much do they see in such a short amount of time. And I think, as we start to look at a lot of the soldiers that have been coming back from, tours in Iraq and Afghanistan and things like that, there's definitely a lot of things that they have seen that they don't have time to process. And I think, especially here for Asuna, there's just no time to really like debrief and decompress from all of the trauma that she's faced, going from one thing to the next. And like you mentioned, this is only a span of 2 years. And so, there's really hasn't been a point for her to really sit down and address a lot of these things. And so I can definitely see how just, giving her the time to stop, take a breath, process a lot of the things that she's seen, the death of, 2 individuals that she might have been close to, even if they weren't relationship wise, just, even just like some of her co-pilots and things like that, like we don't see a lot of, the camaraderie that she may have formed with just, nameless character number 5 over there, and having to see him go down like that, it's just, it adds up over time. And so when we look being a uniform in my real job, I do feel this quite a bit too, but I have it on good authority that she was well liked by her unit, so they were willingly putting themselves in the line of fire, which makes that much more painful with the survivor's guilt. Oh yeah, and survivor guilt is huge. And so, it's always the question is like, why did I get to go home, and why didn't they get to come home? And it's the idea that like, there is something that you don't understand as far as what makes you more qualified to have come home. And really it's just like, it could have been luck, it could have been, you just were in the right place at the right time. There's a million different reasons, but they'll never know because they'll never have the chance to really go back and see this is what caused them to survive and this is what caused this person to perish. And so not knowing and just having it happen over and over again can really just play into that idea of just like, like the Gundam series, like a lot of the times we see it as like like war is crazy, but when you start to sit down and look at it and look at a person going through a lot of these things, you start to see the trauma that it takes on one person. And then if you take that and multiply it by the number of people that are in these series, the number of pilots that we see or don't see, we could see that just like it's not something that you would want to wish on anybody. And thank you for bringing this pick up, because it has definitely a lot more of a real world connection that I think a lot of people don't realize. Like, and just kind of watching this series, it's kind of a little bit fantastical, it can be sometimes, but realistically deep down it's grounded in reality, where we see that like this is a situation that if it had come to it where we had mobile suits, it wouldn't be that far off from the truth.
Yep. So in terms of the factors, is she a danger to others? Yeah, all they gotta do is trigger her and watch out. I mean, what more do I need to say about that?
Yeah, like out of everybody so far, like her and Lalah seem to have like, some really strong points, and she might be very difficult to deal with. And so like I definitely would consider her as like one of the bigger ones to kind of look out for. I know like Spicer's pick was Relena, where she isn't necessarily a pilot, right? And Zappa's pick, who's also a pilot. Like we don't see a lot of those things when it comes down to it, where they really kind of show for Asuna that like she's been through stuff, and it takes that gritty, down to earth, like this is something that could really happen to somebody. Yeah, maybe it not in a mobile suit, but if you just put them in a uniform, you put them out in the field, you change the setting from space to a foreign country, it's not that far from the truth.
Yep. But again, her story and the fact that a lot of the, I suppose, the human aspects of it, for what it was trying to say, at least even up till that point, despite all the cool Gundam stuff, is what drew me to picking her in this case. Is she a danger to herself? I mean, like any teenager, there's a point where you end up circling the drain in your head with all these negative thoughts, right? That's normal. It's multiplied by all this post-traumatic stress that I guarantee you she has, and just the complicated life she's been leading.
She almost sounds like a Char analog.
In some respects, she kind of is.
Female Char.
Char would have his work cut out for him, because she's almost a better pilot than he is.
Oh yeah, she's an A+ new type. She would give him a run for his money.
Case in point.
Absolutely.
But in terms of harming herself, like I said, like her mind would swirl the gutter, but I would think she would have enough force of will that would never actually be a problem. I also think.
Oh,
sorry, go on. No, you first. Go ahead.
I was just going to say another thing that can kind of contribute to, her ability as far as to be able to kind of cope with these things is that, one of the great things about like the military is a lot of people find camaraderie, and some people may not have like some strong friendships, coming out of high school and things like that because they were bullied and whatnot. And you mentioned she had kind of a bit of a bully, but when you go into a situation like this where you're all choosing to be there, you start to build that camaraderie. And just she might have been sitting down one day and just like circling the drain, and someone comes up and is like, hey, you doing all right? Or even just like, hey, let's go do this instead, let's go take care of something, right?
Yeah.
And just having that support group around you is something that can really make or break somebody. And I think that's why, if you look at it in terms of like a lot of soldiers suffering from PTSD when they come home, is they lose that camaraderie. They go back to their house where they don't have other brothers around them that understand really what they're going through. And so that's why we see a lot of like soldiers, when they come back, they have a lot of issues, they have a lot of problems readjusting. And I think if she were to have returned back to try to return to civilian life without any sort of like mental health help, like she would definitely have a lot of issues, and could potentially, like you said, circle that drain to a part where it gets so dark that she makes a decision that could possibly never come back from.
Yeah. So to that end, yes, I think she would absolutely benefit from any and all kinds of therapy that would help, because she's still malleable as a mind, being, a teenager. But also just, she's still got a good head on her shoulders. She's still managing to make critical decisions correctly, and still capable of actually functioning as a normal human being. So in terms of actually getting results and helping her get back to being not necessarily the happy-go-lucky kid she was even before all of this happened, but at least getting her back to a place where she can be comfortable in her own skin is probably entirely attainable.
Yeah, and like the idea of like a broken vase, you can put the pieces back together, but it'll never be the same. And so while she could get back to some semblance of who she was, before a lot of these things, she'll never be exactly the same as she was before.
Exactly. She's no Judo Ashta.
All right.
But again, that's because judo is judo, and judo got the Saturday morning kids version of a space war. Yeah, I said it.
All right.
With fighting action.
All right, let's bring it all back. I think we have a lot of we had a lot of characters presented today, and we see a lot of the issues that are presented here. And it's never an easy job to say what one person would need help over the other. And I honestly really don't think I could pick one person over another, because everyone definitely has some sort of issues. And so to say one person deserves it more than another, I don't think it's fair. And I honestly thought I'd be able to come out with being able to say, one person definitely more than the other. But the more you talk about it, the more you get to know these pilots, you start to develop, you can start to understand some of the things that they have, and then you develop some sort of empathy towards them. And, what I really love about my position as a counselor is that, you start to hear and you start to, understand where people are coming from. You just start to appreciate them. And so to say you have to turn somebody away, that's probably one thing I don't think I'd ever be able to do as a counselor. And so, if I had my way, I'd open it all the way up and just say, let's let them all in. Let's get them all the help that they need. Because, to turn somebody away is like saying, they're not worth the help, they're not worth the time. And, if somebody's out there that thinks that, I'm not worth the struggle, I'm not worth the heartache to get help, it's, that's crazy to believe that. So I would definitely say, if you're out there and you feel like you're having some issues, you're going through a rough time, everyone goes through a rough time, but it doesn't mean you have to go through it alone. And definitely, if you think you need help, go seek help. I'd encourage it. I strongly advise it. Even as a counselor myself, I see somebody to talk about some of these things. It's not something that is regularly talked about. And I definitely feel like, when your car breaks down, you go to a mechanic. When you get a cold, you go see the doctor. When you're dealing with trauma from your past, you should go see a psychologist. It just makes sense. And when you kind of put it in those sort of terms, and I just, if I can just shamelessly plug my channel again, it's just saying, take the time to take care of yourself. Take the time to do the things that you need to, take care of your mental health. And, if it's Gunpla, if it's Plamo, great. If it's not, go do something that you enjoy. And so, sorry to kind of just throw my channel back out there, but, really take the time to take care of yourselves, guys. It's really important.
So in terms, I know it's nearly impossible to rank them, of course, but at least if you had to rank them, maybe not accept one, but if you could put them in an order, what would you kind of think of?
Man, you're putting me on the spot here. Looking back to my notes here and kind of just thinking about a lot of the conversations that we have, I think I can kind of come up with a list here as far as how I'd kind of determine who I think would put in for treatment. And I think number one comes in is going to be actually Lalah. And the reason I say that is because across the board, it seems like a lot of these pilots are very skilled. A lot of these pilots are very dangerous individuals. The thing that I put Lalah at the top for is actually her threat to herself. And the reason being is that, as we mentioned before, her idea that the only way out of this situation is to take her own life. And that is kind of a red flag for me. And again, when we kind of balance out the rest of the characters as far as being a threat to others, she seems like the biggest threat to herself because she's already having that ideation. Compare her to Relena, who's just kind of a risk taker and is not currently thinking through a lot of these things. Lalah's definitely having intentional thoughts about saying like, no, this is the only way out, whereas Relena is an absence of thought. Now, when you look at Katejina, who's just a blatant disregard of her own safety, that's a different story as opposed to someone who's actively trying to do something to hurt themselves. And then when it comes to hurting themselves, I think Asuna is definitely at the bottom of that list, because while she has definitely seen a lot of trauma, it doesn't sound like she has any sort of resentment towards herself, because it seems like she still has a lot of that camaraderie. And so while I definitely put Lalah number 1, I actually would put Asuna at a close number 2. And the reason being is that I feel like Asuna is a prime candidate for receiving inpatient care. Right after Lalah, she presents the most ability to recover. And that's because it seems like she doesn't have any real disjointed thinking. She doesn't have any persevering thoughts that are overriding a lot of her abilities to make rational choices. It seems just like she was just a grunt that happened to see a lot of issues and have a lot of trauma, but never really had the time to process those things. And so I think I would put her at a number 2 slot, because I feel like she would benefit the most from an inpatient care facility compared to Katejina and Relena. And I'll get into them in a little bit, because I feel like Katejina actually belongs in a hospital. I think the mental health institute here would be not enough intensive care for her. I think she definitely requires a lot more care, a lot more attention, and a lot more focus on keeping her from hurting others around her in order to escape to be able to do the things that she wants to do. While Lalah and Asuna, when they be coming into the treatment facility, I don't think they'd necessarily be a threat to others, because it sounds more like that they'll be in a situation where they can start to see that a lot of the things that are going on around them, they can get a break from it, versus Katejina sounds more like she'd be like, if I'm in this situation, I need to get out of it as quickly as possible, and will do anything that she could to get out of it. And so I feel like she would be more recommended for a hospital care as opposed to a mental health institute like this. And so I would put her at number 3 over Relena, because Relena, although she is a very dangerous person in that she has the power to make a lot of other people do things for her, it also sounds like it's not so much intentional blatant disregard for a lot of the things that are going on like Katejina. It sounds more just like she doesn't have the ability to think her thoughts through before making an action. And while that's definitely dangerous to a lot of people around her, it's definitely dangerous to herself. It's not as intentional as someone like Lalah, and she definitely hasn't physically seen or done the things that Asuna has done, which would really kind of jar her into thinking like, maybe I need to start thinking some of these things through, whereas Asuna has seen those things and she continues to put herself in those situations because she knows that that's what she needs to do. It's a voluntary thing. And so ultimately, if I had to rank it, Lalah would be at number 1 because she's the biggest threat to herself. Number 2 would be Asuna, because I believe she'd benefit the most from this sort of treatment. Katejina is at number 3 because she is just undoubtedly, certifiably in need of mental health care, more so than an institute like this. She needs hospital care. And then number 4 would be Relena.
And there you have it, folks. We've gone back and forth, talked about it, and all in all had a really good conversation about mental health in general. Now, of course, you can find us here on the Gunpla Network, but you can also find Taz over on Plamo Therapist. We'll have his link in the description below as well. Be sure to check out his videos, and of course, stick around. Check us out for next time. We will have a new episode for you next month. And as always, friends, stay safe and keep on building.
Keep building, everyone. Stay safe.
Don't forget to like and subscribe.
And comment. Tell us